Good afternoon. Welcome to this beautiful, wonderful day. And we're going to begin, as we begin all of our programs, with episode 1, 2, and 3. And episode 1, we began with a Christian prayer. Episode 2, we began with a Christian prayer and a Jewish prayer. And episode 3, we're going to begin with a Christian prayer and a Muslim prayer. And I'll ask the speakers to come and spend some prayer with us, and let us be very respectful as they do so. Thank you.
Please bow your head. Precious memories, how they linger, how they ever flood our soul. In the stillness of the midnight, sacred secrets do unfold. Lord, we thank you. We thank you for this day. We thank you for this commemoration. Lord, we thank you for our history. And Lord, as we remember our history, Lord, we celebrate the victory, Lord, that we're gaining thus far. And we just ask your blessings, Lord, that we continue to prosper and that your blessings fall upon this country and direct us in the way that you would have us to go. We ask your blessings upon all persons present here today. Give us strength, but most of all, continue to give us the will and the fortitude to move forward. In Jesus' name I pray, amen.
Assalamu alaikum, peace be upon you. I will first read a prayer in Arabic, then I will translate it, and then I will ask for you to bow your heads with me in silent prayer. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. Ameen. The English translation. In the name of Allah, the gracious, the merciful. All praise belongs to Allah, Lord of all the worlds, the gracious, the merciful. Master of the day of judgment, thee alone do we worship, and thee alone do we implore for help. Guide us in the right path, the path of those on whom thou hast bestowed thy blessings, those who have not incurred thy displeasure, and those who have not gone astray. I ask this prayer to be announced today because this prayer is a special prayer for the Muslims, and in commemoration of the Muslims that came early to the Americas under the conditions under which they came, may their memory always be remembered. I will now ask you to join in a silent prayer where you pray in the way that is most suitable for you. Bismillah, in the name of Allah, silent prayer. Bismillah. Ameen.
We'll continue moving according to the program that's in front of you, flyer. And at this time, I'd like to ask the director of the Normandy High School Chorale. And the director will introduce his group and will share with us It's great music.
Good afternoon. My name is Dwayne Foster. I am the director of the Normandy High School Chorale. I'm also the Fine Arts coordinator for the Normandy Schools Collaborative. We are so honored to be here this afternoon. We're going to come to you with two selections. The first one is Stevie Wonder's Higher Ground, which is arranged by Paul Langford. And then we have a beautiful, beautiful rendition of Stand By Me as sung by the Freedom Choir from London during the Prince wedding. Was that last year? We're going to do that version. Everybody knows Stand By Me. You can definitely join in. And we're very honored to be here today. Our accompanist is Miss Irene Franklin, and this is the Normandy High School Chorale. The soloist that you will hear will be Margaret Michaud, soprano, raise your hand. You'll also hear Tyler Brown, bass, and Mr. Melvin Gates, tenor. Thank you.
And when the night has come and the land is dark and the moon is the only light we'll see.
No, I won't be afraid. No, I won't be afraid. Just as long as you stand by me. So darling, darling, stand by me. Ooh, yeah, stand by me, stand by me, stand by me. If the sky that we look upon should tumble and fall, or the mountains should crumble to the sea, I won't cry, I won't cry, no, I won't shed a tear, just as long as you stand by me. So darling, darling, stand by me. Ooh, yeah, stand by me, stand by me, stand by me. Stand by me. Oh, yeah, stand by me, stand by me, stand by me. Stand. Oh, yeah, stand by me, stand by me, stand by me. Oh, stand by me, stand by me, stand by me. Stand. Oh, yeah, stand by me, 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 stand by me.
Fantastic. I don't want you to go too far. I'll stand by you. I have a graduate class. Got a graduate class. We're waiting for you. We continue our program, and on the program, you see the next person who is to make remarks. But I'd like to recognize this person beyond these remarks. Adrian Davis is the name, But I'd like to give you a little history about where we are as a school, how we got to where we are, and what role Adrian has played. I admit boldly that I was part of the foundation of Black Studies at this university. Can you imagine a university of this stature not having Black students? But that certainly came to a very quick stop. There were some very adversarial students, not in terms of anything that would have been roughhouse, but students who knew that they had a right to a very decent and a very adequate education. And in the process of pursuing that, they did a number of things to bring to the attention of this university that they had not been served, and those who should be coming after them were not going to be served. And so they did what students do. They decided to stop school. And they did it very effectively. And they got the attention of the administration. I was blessed to be one of the individuals, I and a man named Robert L. Williams, we were the co-founders of Black Studies, and we extended the foundation of this university. And the university then had something more to build on. But you see, the fact that you have a foundation that's extended, you still have to have someone to make sure that what is in those rooms should be there, and the posture and the shape of that university has to take on a distinction of being a place not only of intellectual inlight, but a place that certainly pays homage to the plurality of cultural ethics that were in the area. And so this was a school that had approximately 30 Black students when I first came here. Now you walk on this campus and you see something entirely different. But I want you to know that having a foundation requires additional builders. And the person that I want to bring on board now, you can briefly look at the sketch of her resume, her bio, but that doesn't say it. The fact is that you have to have someone who is diligent, perseveres, someone who is fearless, and someone is demanding on a university living up to what it professes to be. And I want you to know that for some time, some considerable time, I didn't know if we were going to have anyone to build on what we had started. But I can tell you now without any hesitation, we certainly have, and that person is Adrian.
Well, once again, I want to start by thanking my senior colleague, Jack Kirkland. We're just all trying to follow in your footsteps. Jack is a role model of persistence, vision, and a Morpheus matrix-like skill of using the force of a massive research institution to help promote justice in his community. This isn't easy now, and I cannot imagine how difficult it would have been 50 years ago when Jack began his transformative, crucial work. As I said at the second part of the trilogy in June, some people believe that becoming an academic means leaving behind childish things like caring for other people, activism, and a deep and abiding belief that we all have a responsibility to repair the deep injustices of our world. But Jack shows us the profound untruth of this, and his profound trilogy of 1619 is yet one more incredible project that Jack has launched on behalf of us all. Thank you, Jack. On behalf of the Chancellor and the Provost, I want to welcome you all to Washington University for this final third part in the 400 Years Trilogy, 400 Years Forward, Freedom in Our Time. Washington University is an important citizen in St. Louis, and when we walk our values, when we action our values, we can have an impact. As Jack said, we have been able to transform the student body over the last 50 years. Today, nearly 50% of our undergraduate students identify as non-white or international students. Over 10% of them, over 700, are African American. Our faculty, there are about 60 African Americans now who hold tenure or are on the tenure track. Almost 8% of the faculty overall. In the spring, we will install the 7th African American woman into an endowed chair in the last decade. This same woman now holds a role as Associate Dean in Arts and Sciences. An African-American man who many of you may know, Lerone Martin, has been appointed the Director of American Culture Studies beginning in June. The Chancellor's Cabinet is now half women, and we now have 20 senior African-American administrators. And the department that Jack founded, African and African-American Studies, continues to grow and to be strengthened every year. Since the second part of the trilogy in June, Washington University has inaugurated a new chancellor, our first new leader in a quarter of a century. He was inaugurated on October 3rd. And if you have never been to a university inauguration, imagine a royal wedding without the dress. In the middle of this pageantry and pomp and circumstances, our new chancellor issued a manifesto. It was his vision for the next quarter century at Washington University in St. Louis. He set out 3 priorities for us: academic distinction, access, and St. Louis. Taken together, these 3 pillars add up to a profound belief in the theme of this third part of the trilogy, freedom in our time. First, he talked about academic distinction. As I have said before, Washington University is a research university. And to quote the Chancellor, my boss, great universities solve the great problems of the world, and racial injustice is one of the greatest problems of the world. With the launch of the Chancellor's first big academic initiative, our new university-wide Center for the Study of Race, Ethnicity, and Equity, we will leverage our formidable faculty who work on race and ethnicity across its many dimensions to tackle racial disparities in health, jobs, education, and policing, to envision a racially equitable, built environment where everyone can flourish, to design algorithms that encode justice instead of racism, and equally importantly, to celebrate the transformative beauty and poetry that is the Black arts. We will invite St. Louis partners to join us in authoring white papers, or what we will call Black papers, that will transform policy. This university helped to send a rover to Mars. We are fighting to cure cancer. We will fight to end racism. The Chancellor's second priority is access. Washington University's mission is not to educate the wealthiest 1% of children in the world. To move our mission forward of access, on October 3rd, our Chancellor announced the WashU Pledge, a bold new financial aid program that will provide a free undergraduate education to all incoming full-time Missouri and Southern Illinois students who are either Pell Grant eligible or who come from families who earn less than $75,000 a year. This is our commitment to access. Please send your children to us. We will take good care of them. Our African American graduation rate is about 92, 93%. We will take good care of them. Oh, and before I forget, the last 4 Rhodes Scholars that Washington University had, all 4 were African American. We will take good care of them. And finally, St. Louis. Washington University has prided itself on being in St. Louis for over 150 years. Our new chancellor has announced that now we will be Washington University for St. Louis, to truly invest in and partner with this region, which not only has challenges, but has opportunities and possibilities and dreams. If we in St. Louis can put ourselves on a path toward greatness, we can be a template for urban ecosystems everywhere. Now, if today, the final part of this trilogy, is anything like the first 2 parts, you are in for a special day. And I wish that I could stay for the entire time to know what I know will be inspiring and terrific remarks from Karine, but I have a center to launch. I will be with you in spirit. I will close by saying the ongoing effects of structural racism are powerful, but history has shown us that the heart of equality, the mind of justice, and the soul of liberation are mightier. Thank you.
Did I leave it in good hands? Now, in this environment that was really hot with concern and passion for education, for inclusion, there were a tremendous crop of young scholars who grew up in this environment. And we'll have the occasion to meet one of them, who was an organizer, who was constantly involved in helping other groups to see the big picture, who graduated from this university and as an outstanding scholar. And then there was a little void, and at some point down the road, we discovered that he had an honor and a distinction which was of some magnitude, and that is that he was the youngest Black recipient of the Pulitzer. an outstanding award. And his work was in an area that I think I might have had something to do with. It was called institutionalized racism. And this man has done extremely, extremely outstanding work as a journalist. He works as a team with a great number of people and is capable, obviously, of independently putting together a story that certainly is awe-inspiring. And without any hesitation, that student I'm talking about is right in front of me. No longer a student, but a person of great stature, Kenny Cooper.
Well, Professor, I'm still a student. Because when you stop learning, you kind of stop living. I was going to do this privately, but I decided I'd do it publicly. I want to thank Jack Kirkland for what he taught me the freshman year, my first semester, when I took an Introduction to Black Studies course, 201, 101, whatever it was. And it's not that he changed my worldview, he fortified it. Things I felt to be true, was pretty sure were true, he gave me how to articulate it, how to put it into a historical, social, and analytical context. And quite literally, throughout my career as a journalist, more than 40 years, any number of times, Jack Kirkland has popped in my head at certain moments, and I said, oh, this is what the professor was talking about. This is what's happening now. And it's gotten to the point now where, at my place of work, they call me a senior editor, for reasons that are partly obvious. I've been passing that wisdom on to younger folks. Just did it the other day. A young Asian woman who works in my same news organization was complaining that she looks so young that some people come in and think she's an intern, even though she's a full-fledged reporter. And this was on Facebook. And one piece of advice she got was, you shouldn't have to change anything, that's some other people's problem. And privately, I messaged back and forth with her, well, in an ideal world, that would be true. But we don't live in that world. We live in a world that is not the world that should be. And I gave her an example. When I was a young reporter, I got passed over more than once. And when I asked why, I got told, oh, you're still young. You got plenty of time. So instead of expecting them to change, I changed a little something. I grew a goatee to make myself look older. And one of the things that I learned in that course, those many years ago, was that the thing that orders race relations in this country is power. It's the power dynamics that order those relations. And I came to know then, I heard, and came to observe that once people get power, they don't want to give it up. They don't want to share it. And it doesn't matter who has the power, that's generally true. We can look to the home continent of Africa, and we see that there are people who are African, as many of us here are of African descent, and they don't want to give up power. Robert Mugabe, this guy Museveni in Uganda, So it's not a thing that's necessarily spread by a partisan political point of view. Although it's true in this country, the party that is certainly most responsible for suppressing and disfranchising black voters is one party, the Republican Party, particularly the Republican Party in the South and certain sections of the Midwest. But going back to this theme that, you know, whoever you are, once you get power, you don't want to give it up, I'm going to cite a couple of examples from the state where I live, one of the bluest states in the country, Massachusetts, sometimes called the People's Republic of Massachusetts. I was talking to a professor at the University of Massachusetts, Boston, who's of Japanese descent. His parents were interned, and he's a political scientist. And he pointed out that for some odd reason, this very liberal democratic state does not allow same-day voter registration. In the day and age, you can pull a card with a chip out of your pocket and swipe it and get instant verification you got the money to pay for what you're buying. How come we can't instantly verify somebody's identity when they register on Election Day? And I want to take it down another level to the city of Boston. Now, Boston has, to put it lightly, reputation issues when it comes to black folks. And that reputation was sealed actually, or set, a long time ago. In the early 1970s, when a federal judge named W. Arthur Garrity, Jr., in whose courtroom I reported, a few years later, he ordered the schools to desegregate. And I've often seen it referred to as Boston's busing crisis. And not long ago, I reviewed a book by a young scholar at Arizona State who reviewed media coverage of busing, school desegregation. And you know that media often called it busing being the issue, whereas in Boston, before Judge Garrity's order, more than half of middle school students, more than half of high school students were already getting on a bus to go to school. So it wasn't the bus that was issued. The issue was mixing black children with white children under order by a federal court that found that the city of Boston, the Boston School Committee, had violated their constitutional rights. But the little known fact is, since the year 2000, Boston has been majority minority. It's like 52, 54% black, Latino, or Asian. We have now a black police commissioner. We have an African-American district attorney who's of a progressive mode and wants to change the way the system works and campaign like that. But on the other hand, we're one of the few cities in the top 25 in population who've never had a mayor of color. Never. And we have a city council that has sort of an interesting structure. 4 members are elected citywide, and 9 are elected by district. And since this demographic changed about 20 years ago, an interesting thing has happened. Of the 4 citywide elected councilors, pretty consistently, 2 have been of color. And it's been a mix. It was Asian and Latino, black and Latino, black and Asian, and in the next council coming up, it's going to be Asian and Latina. So that's about 50%, 52, 54% of color. That's about right. But when you look at the district council seats, until the last election 2 years ago, out of 9, there had never been more than 2 councilors, district councilors of color. Now, why would that be if citywide half can be of color, but by district only 20%? What's the answer? Districting, redistricting. Those districts were drawn to protect white incumbents. Now, 2 years ago, it was a big breakthrough when an African American woman won in another district. So that was 3 out of 9. And actually, just this month, a Latino man won in another district. So in the next council, 4 out of 9 district councilors, 2 out of 4 at-large councilors. And to make it clear, I know many of you may not know the landscape of Boston, but in Boston there's a neighborhood called Mattapan. And it is the blackest zip code in Boston. 72% of African descent. And when it comes to district city council seats, guess what? Mattapan is cut into 3 pieces, into 3 different districts. In technical legal language, this is known as cracking. You crack up a concentrated population so they don't really decide in any of those 3 districts who gets elected. In the neighborhood I live in, called Dorchester, which is actually about 40% of the city's landmass, maybe 25% of the population, it's always had one of its 2 district councils be African, of African descent. But in his district, now it's her, new counselor, it's like 72, 75% of the voting age population is of color. So you concentrate all these people in color in one district so they can only influence the outcome in one district. That, in redistricting parlance, is called packing. Pack them all in one district so they don't have any influence on anything else. And it actually affects me personally because I live in the other district in Dorchester, which on paper is majority minority. But we're a long way from ever having a council of color in that district because the district next door has been so much packed with people of color. I say this to say, when it comes to districting, and I've spent years, early in my career, I spent years covering the House of Representatives and redistricting and congressional races across the country. And I've come to believe, and this is a change of heart, and this is a personal opinion, that the country would be better served, and I believe people of color would be better served, if at every level, Congress, legislature, county seats, council seats, if those lines were drawn not by the people who have the most to win or lose, the incumbents, but rather by independent commissions. Couple more points. I've also come to believe that the electoral college has got to go. In 2000, now this is interesting. In 2012, I was freelance, and I had a very interesting assignment. A daily newspaper in India, where I had worked as a foreign correspondent, asked me to cover the last 2 months of the presidential campaign because they were interested in this guy, Barack Obama, and how that was going to turn out. And I agreed to do it. The money wasn't great, but it was something. And the editor said to me, you know, the first thing we want you to do can you explain this electoral college? Because we never understood how Gore got more votes, but Bush won. And it made me think about how we must look to the world. I mean, India is a democracy. It's the world's largest democracy. It's firmly a democracy. I lived there for 3 years. They get it. It looks very messy on the surface, but they appreciate majority civilian rule. And that democracy doesn't understand why we have something called an electoral college. When I did my research, it goes back to the Holy Roman Empire. What a modern idea. What a modern idea. Anyway, I just wanted to make the point. I'm sure you hear lots about, and they are, the awful things that Republicans have been doing in too many states. But I wanted to make the general point that it's really not a partisan party monopoly on the abuse of power to retain power. It's kind of like a human thing. And that's why we need independent checks, like redistricting commissions. It would be good if we actually had a Supreme Court that actually cared about this being a small d democracy. And I don't see a clear path to this, but it would be very helpful if Congress or court cases led to the restoration of the pre-clearance provisions of the Voting Rights Act of 1965 that the Supreme Court struck down in an amazing moment of ignoring history. And as soon as they struck down, that history reemerged in those southern and Midwestern states. Thanks for listening.
Appreciate everything. Did a good job. Okay. In your program, you will see statement from the chair, and I have a prelude to each one of the episodes of the trilogy, and I would suggest and hope that you would read this with your family and perhaps share it with your visitors for Thanksgiving, and it might minimize some of the conflict. But it will cause additional conflict, and that is all that we're raising are questions that must be resolved if this country is to move ahead in the creed that it professes. And so to do that, of course, we're talking about voting and how important voting is. And I want to bring my colleague to speak with us about this. This is an area that she has a great deal of passion for. And I would like for her to share some information about voting. Let me just tell you that she is a person who I know from as close as across the hall, and she is a very passionate individual about whatever it is that she grabs a hold of. And right now, it's the vote, how to get it out, how to make it impactful, and how to make it accomplish and achieve its purpose. And so, Glenna, come and talk with us.
Wow, thank you. So good afternoon, and Jack just mentioned that we worked across the hall from each other for, I don't know, probably about 10 years. And when I first started working at WashU, the only African-American people I saw in the whole school of social work was Jack and I think maybe George Herbert Williams. And there weren't, as he said, there weren't a lot of black kids, black students that were going there, but I started to see them grow, the number of them being there. And so what Jack doesn't know is that he was very good about talking to students. If they want to talk to him, he's going to make an appointment with them, he's going to show up, he's going to be there. And so they were always anxious to be there, so they'd get there early. And I'd have my door open, and I'd go, I'm like, are you waiting for somebody? And they'd always say, well, yeah, we're waiting on Professor Kirkland. And I'm like, okay, well, what time's your appointment? And they would be there 20 minutes early. And so I said, well, here's a chair. You can take this chair and put it in the hall if you want to wait or if you want to come in. But I say all of that to say that Jack's willingness to work with students and talk to them no matter what, it's important. And I learned that, and I got that from him. And I was just telling my husband as we were walking over here that on Friday, I think I had 3 different students to stop by and, and just talk. And so it's a privilege to be able to do that. But anyway, I want to thank Professor Jack Kirkland for his vision and this awesome trilogy of events. And I also like to thank his team. I'm certain that this wonderful event would not have happened without all of you. I'm humbled by the invitation to be part of this program. Thank you, Atia and Cynthia and everybody else that's on the team. I really appreciate you. Our purpose for being here today is so amazing. I've been excited about it since seeing the flyer and super excited when asked to be part of the program. But when promoting the event to friends or think about the remarks that I would make today, I would say something like, we have a real special event on campus to celebrate 400 years us, black folks, have been in this country. And then I would say, well, it's not exactly a celebration, but you know what I mean. You really need to come. And so every time, I must have said this a half a dozen times, and each time they would look at me kind of funny, like, okay, send me the information. And every time I said that, it just didn't jive with my spirit. And it's because of the word celebrate. I needed a different word because celebration it was the wrong choice for marking 400 years of African Americans in this nation, a nation that was built on the back of slavery and racism, on the backs of my ancestors. What would it be to celebrate? What could that look like? So I quickly realized that this historical moment, despite all that has happened over the last 400 years, is a moment of commemoration, a tribute, a way to honor those before us, those of us here now and those to come. Those observations gave me a fresh perspective on the work that I do through the Center for Social Development in the Brown School. The Voter Access and Engagement Initiative is about protecting democracy and the right to vote. It serves as a way to honor the sacrifices blacks made in this country and to pass a torch of knowledge to others. So having that frame of mind, it put things in a different perspective for me. And I want to share something that happened because I think that this will help make my point and show the inspiration behind the work I do. And Jack talked about my passion, and it's so important to enjoy and love what you do. I don't care what it is, and I'm very passionate about this because I was one of those kids that didn't get an opportunity to participate in the fight for civil rights, to participate in any of those kinds of things, but guess what? I benefited from them. So how dare I not be passionate about something that's gonna help people, my people, have a better life? So I volunteered as a poll watcher on Election Day in 2008, intentionally working in a community with a high concentration of blacks. That day I witnessed many failures, and people were lined up, probably twice the perimeter of the space. And that day I witnessed many failures, shortages of paper ballots, broken and faulty equipment, the lack of proper assistance for people with disabilities. Unfortunately, the list goes on, long lines and extended wait times. I thought that these were typical occurrences on Election Day, something that happens at every polling location because systems fail, procedures fail. Things happen, right? But I also saw the excitement in the eyes of hundreds of first-time voters who were eager to help make history by voting for a black man for president of the United States. I was excited to see so many people, especially young people, and particularly young black males. So as I passed out water and chatted with voters waiting in line, I thanked them for coming because I know people want to feel appreciated. I began to ask questions like, is this your first time voting? Most of them, especially the young people, said yes. My follow-up question was, why are you voting? The common response was that Barack would be the first black president and the voter wanted to help and be part of history. My final question was, are you familiar with the other electoral races and ballot initiatives? Most said, nope, I'm only here to vote for Barack. That last response would haunt me for years. You see, because I know how to research candidates, I grew up in a culture of voting, but I've always known that others did not have what I was taught. I wanted to understand the reasons for the response. Why did voters feel so disconnected from other concerns on the ballot? In all honesty, it's not that I didn't get it, but I wondered what could make a person become a lifetime voter. What would it take to create a culture of voting in black communities? As the Voter Access and Engagement Initiative has developed, I often have thought about how that work might help people to connect real life issues to voting. If people can't connect voting to their daily lives, if they don't think that voting matters or that they matter, it will always be difficult to maintain a healthy and strong democracy. It's not enough to tell people that casting a ballot on Election Day is a fundamental right of all eligible voters. While it's true, more is needed. After the 2016 election, the center where I work, our staff, we met to discuss how the new administration's policies might impact our work. See, during that discussion, I asked about launching a body of work on voter suppression. The director, and he's still our director, Michael Sheridan, thought it was a great idea for several reasons. He also volunteered on Election Day in another place in 2008, and the experiences shaped his enthusiasm as well. The new work would enable us to lend our expertise in protecting democracy and would reconnect us to the social work profession's historical contributions in the suffrage movement. In thinking about a concept for VAE, which started in 2017, I remembered my experience at the polls in 2008. However, more interestingly, President Obama lost Missouri, in case you didn't know this, by less than 3,300 votes. So was it a fair and square race, or was there something else at play, like voter suppression? In preparation to create any study, you have to research the literature, and I quickly discovered research after research about the ways voter suppression is practiced in this country, and I wanted to find ways to mitigate these practices, like voter ID laws. Missouri was the first state to have the notion to have voter ID law. I have a voter ID law through Kit Bond proposed it. It didn't go anywhere initially, but eventually did. And then we actually passed one in 2016. So it isn't an accident that our voter access initiative often, and we use something called a hashtag called RiseMo in 2020. It recalls Still I Rise, the poem of the late Maya Angelou. So RISE is an acronym which stands for research as a tool by which we stay in the process of correcting and refining hypotheses that should lead to impact and positive change. The I is to identify innovative opportunities for a healthy and strong democracy. And the S is to support organizations in their efforts concerning voter participation. And E is to educate and engage citizens in the electoral process and identifying ways that create a culture and lifetime of casting ballots. So let me explain how we've been doing that here locally. So for our research, our study that we did in the last election, November 2018, it sought to explore the following questions. Are access to voting, voter processes, and infrastructure equitable at every poll location? Does living in a predominantly Black and low-income neighborhood present more barriers to the electoral process? In this first empirical research study, with the tremendous guidance and assistance support of the St. Louis County, St. Louis City election administrators, yeah, believe it or not, they want people to be able to vote, the ones that I've worked with. That sought to examine experiences in the electoral process and how these differences may have affected the participation of registered voters with an intentional attention to race. Engaging with election administrators for this study was enlightening and encouraging. We learned so much from them. But we used a mixed methods design. We used quantitative and qualitative. Our survey had those sorts of questions in it. And we dispatched 38 different students to go to 20 different polling places in St. Louis City and St. Louis County during the November 2018 election, the midterm election. Polling places were selected using race and median income census data as indicators that may influence a person's opportunity to cast a ballot at the poll location. Results from the study found that deficiencies in voting access and procedures are significantly higher in predominantly Black and low-income census tracts where the poll sites were located. A variety of deficiencies are illuminated in the study and range from the relationship of race and accessibility, staffing, equipment malfunctions, to extended wait times to cast a ballot. Specifically, the evidence found that the circumstances in which voters cast their ballots vary by the race and income of the community where voters reside. In a bigger perspective, this research points to evidence that Black people and those with lower income face countless barriers in participating in the electoral process. But it also asks this question: are ineffective voting procedures a form of voter suppression? Are these the only barriers that Black Americans experience to cast a ballot in St. Louis City and St. Louis County? Intentional or not, to what extent is voter suppression happening without laws? So in thinking about the I, inclusion, we were really proud of the fact that we were able to include students, because what we learned from them is that they were interested. Who knew? We weren't sure that they really cared about the things that those of us who are a little more mature cared about, but they do care. And they were excited about participating in it. It was also great to have a collaboration with the election officials. We tried our best to support community-based organizations' efforts for equitable voting practices, like hosting election protection training. And so those training volunteers to help voters on election day to navigate the process of casting the ballot is important for us. And so some of our partners that we work with are the St. Louis Area Voting Initiative, Missouri and St. Louis Area Election Protection Coalition, the Metropolitan Congregations United, and Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority. We use the research to educate voters about their fundamental right to vote and the rules of engagement using other platforms like op-eds and interviews on public radio. There's still so much more work to do, but in the closing sentences in the poem Still I Rise by Maya Angelou, she wrote, "Bringing the gifts that my ancestors gave, I am the dream and the hope of the slave. I rise, I rise, I rise." The VAE initiative and I will continue to rise and elevate the notion that democracy can't survive unless it's practiced every day. It's been an honor and a privilege to help people rise and look to more opportunities in 2020, the year that faith brings a 2020 vision, we hope, for a strong and healthy democracy for all. Thank you.
Skype ready?
I was actually waiting for it. Hello, everyone. Jumbo. Habargani. Okay, not to worry about it. Okay. I am Vivian Lang Anderson Watson Watt. I am the artistic director for Kaumba Youth Performance Ensemble. As I'm saying this, I'm waiting for him to move that podium. So I got to get up here and do me for a minute. Our group has been here for the first 400 years plus, and we are honored to have been here for the second and also for this very last one. So thank you very much, Wash Youth. Thank you, Cynthia Williams. Thank all of those people who are sponsoring. And it is so fabulous to see so many people in the audience. Kaumba Youth Performance Ensemble is sponsored by Better Family Life, and what we do is we bring these children into our space and try to give them life skills, the soft and the hard ones. So today they're just going to do a reprisal of what they did before, because we are generational. We not only use the older, most professional dancers, but we also try to get our young kids to be a part of their African and African American culture. So with no further ado, because I think we have moved that podium. Thank you, Monsieur. Okay, so if my percussionists are ready, can we do a drum call real quick? The very first time we were here, we honored Catherine Dunham and Chuck Davis, two very well-known, very, very important foundation and historians and anthropologists who also made it a point to make sure that we understood our culture and remembered it. So underneath of that, the first movement we're going to do is called Bongo. And we are at places. Kiki. And there is a simple chant that goes with this. Dun. Bring it down, let's hear them sing. Si, say, sa, so. Bongo, bongo.
Dose afumaye, bango bango fumaye, bango to bango fumaye, dose afumaye, bango bango fumaye, bango to bango fumaye, dose afumaye, bango fumaye, bango to bango fumaye, dose afumaye.
Come on, y'all. We have. That was our group to Hair Baby. Top down, hold, stop, and out. And come back, wait for your intro, come back. Get ready. Right, turn around, face the front. Out, go up. Stay there, 5, 4, si, say, sa, so. Careful. Careful. Keep playing, keep playing. Take it down, take it down. Keep it there, keep playing, keep playing. What? Wait. Hey, who are you? Oh, you're the jitterbug lady. Oh, okay. Yeah. Yes, thank you, Miss Amanda, for helping clean up. Are they ready? Thank you so much. That's Miss Amanda. For our last little piece, for our last 2 minutes, I was just, I'm not a sound person. I was really afraid to push this button because I didn't know if this is what I was supposed to do. But watch you, is this where I'm supposed to be with this recorded music? Okay, fine, here we go.
The silence is quiet, and it feels like it's getting hard to breathe. And I know you feel like dying, but I promise we'll take the world to its feet. Move mountains, bring it to its feet. Move mountains. And I'll rise up, I'll rise like the day. I'll rise up, I'll rise unafraid. I'll rise up, and I do it 1,000 times again. We have each other, and for that we have each other, and we will rise, we will rise, we'll rise, we'll rise. I'll rise.
Our kids will rise. Our community will rise. We are African, we're African American. We are many cultures. We have many skills, we have many talents. In support of our kids, we appreciate that. Thank you so much for inviting us back. For your bows up to your line and sweep. Thank you. Coomba Youth Performance Ensemble.
Did you notice that large age range? Yeah, quite fantastic. I know what these young people do after school. We're approaching now the opportunity to hear our keynote speaker. I'm certainly anxious to hear what she has to say. I actually have dinner with her frequently. She doesn't know it because my wife and I are eating on the other side of television. Well, she certainly has something to say. I am just so delighted that she's here. She's going to bring us a perspective from, I don't know where, because last time I heard she was signing her books all over the place, and she's sold quite a few already before I even said that they're on sale back there. So I just think that to have someone of our hue who can engage at a level of discourse and can bring very insightful awarenesses that might not have occurred to you, but it's obviously occurred to her. And so when you see her, you're not just looking at news, you're inviting yourself to an education. I also have gotten mail from her on Move On. And I really don't want to take up a lot of her time, but she is known to all of you, or you would not be here. I'm not under the illusion that I'm the reason that I've drawn you. But I know that you're eager to hear what she has to say, and so am I. So with great pleasure, I bring you Karine.
Thank you so much. Oh, let me figure this out. Professor Jack Kirkland, I've heard such amazing things about you this afternoon. Thank you for everything that you do for all of us. I am happy to have dinner with you anytime. Not just on the other side of the TV. I just want to also just acknowledge once more time these young people that came out here and just gave us life. I am ready for the revolution. I'm going to put my book down for a second because I don't have much space up here. That is what I've been doing for the past week. But I'm going to get to it here. Thank you all for coming. It is an honor to be here. I don't take these opportunities lightly. I do the work that I do because of our people, because I have the opportunity to bring a voice. I have a platform, and I honor that platform. And I know that when I'm on TV, I speak for many people. So when I get asked to come and speak, I say yes. The right to vote has never been given in my family. My parents grew up in Haiti, the first country where enslaved people through a successful rebellion to create a new free country. Haiti's roots are steeped in freedom and independence, but by the time my parents were turning into young adults, the country was steeped in something else: dictatorship. Haiti was no longer the country of free speech and free expression. It had turned into a country of violence and silence for anyone who opposed the dictatorship government. But my parents already possessed the values of freedom and democracy in their veins. They were determined to create a better life for their family. They were determined to go somewhere where they could have a voice again, so they fled. After a few stops along the way, immigration is rarely easy. My family wound up in the United States, specifically Queens. Eventually, my father and I became US citizens. Now, the right to vote was never guaranteed in my family, but the right to vote isn't guaranteed here in the United States either. Black people here have given their lives and spent years, literally decades and centuries, fighting for the right to vote. In school, we often learn about Martin Luther King Jr. and John Lewis and the famous March on Selma. But what we don't learn is that even though we passed the Voting Rights Act in 1965, there is still a nationwide effort to silence Black people's votes and voices. Just take a look at the ballot initiative in Florida last year, Amendment 4. In Florida, as well as many other states across the country, people with felonies are barred from voting, not just for the length of their sentence, but often for life, because of the way the criminal justice system in the United States criminalizes Black and brown people. That means predominantly Black and brown people are disenfranchised by this practice of taking away people with felonies' right to vote. In 2018, Floridians got to vote on a ballot question: should they restore these folks' voting rights? If passed, the restoration of these rights would have been one of the largest voter restoration in US history. Florida voters overwhelmingly said yes to Amendment 4, overwhelmingly, wanting to restore the right to vote to the millions of people whose right had been taken away. But the state legislature, controlled by Republicans, had other plans, likely threatened by what would happen if a large group of predominantly Black and brown Floridians got the right to vote back. They passed a law to undermine the ballot measure. Just this week, the Florida Supreme Court said it would take up the case. 1.2 million people are still waiting to hear whether or not they have the right to vote. 400 years ago, the first ship carrying over enslaved people to the United States arrived. Just under 150 years ago, during the Reconstruction period, Mississippi elected the first ever Black senator to the United States Senate. 64 years ago, Rosa Parks refused to sit where she was supposed to be, on a bus. and helped electrify a nationwide movement. 56 years ago, Bayard Rustin planned the March on Washington, only to be largely erased from our history textbooks because he was gay. 56 years ago, freedom riders gave up their lives to desegregate our buses in our country. 54 years ago, civil rights leader John Lewis and Martin Luther King Jr. and other leaders from SINC and CORE walked over the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama, for the right to vote. Today's voter suppression may look different than the voter suppression that Martin Luther King Jr. and the civil rights movement fought against. You may not see poll taxes or outright segregation, but make no mistake, Black people are still fighting to be equal citizens in this country. Voting suppression today may look different than it did in the 1950s and 1960s, but the attempts to disenfranchise Black people and take away their right to vote is still happening, just in far subtler ways. Since 2010, at least half of the states in the United States have enacted provisions making it harder to vote. These laws may sound neutral or even good on their face, but they're just as dangerous a threat to our democracy as the poll taxes of the Jim Crow era. And they're just as intentional. Republicans have just had to be a bit sneakier about their efforts to disenfranchise Black and brown voters. Here's what today's voter suppression looks like. According to the Brennan Center for Justice, voter purges are on the rise between 2006 and 2008. States removed 4 million voters from their rolls. Between 2014 and 2016, that number jumped to 16 million people. But what's a voter purge? Federal law says that each state is supposed to maintain its own statewide voter registration lists and is tasked with keeping them up to date and accurate. If it's an important process, at its best, the process makes sure voter rolls are updated and correct. But as Republicans' effort to disenfranchise voters of color have grown, voter rolls have been used to pernicious ends. Republican officials have used their responsibility to maintain accurate voter rolls as a way to instead kick millions of people off of them and make it harder to vote. Even worse, because you're not informed that you've been kicked off a voter roll, you can show up to the polls on election day and only to find out that you're no longer on your state's voter list. That can set off a whole host of issues. But there's the main one point. It's a lot harder to cast your vote and have it count that day. In 2018, Georgia was ground zero for mass disenfranchisement through voter purges. The governor's race was looking unexpectedly close. The state, long assumed to be a Republican stronghold, was actually far more purple than red. It's just that a lot of the state's Black, Latinx, and Asian populations hadn't been encouraged to vote in the past. But Stacey Abrams, the Democratic nominee for governor, was looking to change that. Abrams was the minority leader of the Georgia House of Representatives, but also ran a non-for-profit called the New Georgia Project. The goal of the New Georgia Project was simple. 62% of Georgians were people of color, 18 to 29 years old and unmarried women. But they only made up 53% of registered voters. Stacey Abrams and the New Georgia Project wanted to change that. Her organization had been working to register these potential voters. The problem? Abrams' opponent was Brian Kemp, Georgia's then Secretary of State. And as Secretary of State, Kemp was in charge of how the state handled keeping its voter rolls updated. So what did he do in the face of Abrams' rising polls numbers? Backed largely by states' Black and Latinx populations. He purged a nearly unprecedented number of voters in the state, around 500,000. 500,000 people could now show up to the polls only to find out they weren't registered to vote. Their registrations had been canceled. The purges undoubtedly affected the outcome of the governor's race and tipped it in Kemp's favor. An investigation found that 340,000 of the voters who had been purged from the rolls were done so improperly. Without voter purges shrouded under the guise of regular voter roll maintenance, Stacey Abrams very well may have become America's first ever Black female governor. What's worse, Georgia shows no signs of slowing it down. Just 2 weeks ago, on October 30th, the GOP-led Georgia state government flagged another 313,000 people to purge from its voter rolls. Unless we do something, voter purges will continue to be a mainstay of modern-day voter suppression tactics, and millions of people, not just in Georgia, will continue to suffer. But voter purges are far from the only source of voter suppression tactics the GOP is employing to silence the voices of Black and brown Americans. The disenfranchisement of people charged with felonies is another systematic source of voter suppression, as I mentioned. In 2016, according to the Sentencing Project, 6.1 million Americans were barred from voting due to laws prohibiting people with felonies from voting. The United States doesn't have a federal law that dictates states strip people with felonies of their right to vote. It's up to the individual states to decide what to do. And many states, especially those with large Black and Latinx populations, have chosen to take away these populations' right to vote. Across the United States, 1 in 13 Black adults have lost their right to vote. In 2016, in Florida, Kentucky, Tennessee, and Virginia, more than 1 in 5 Black Americans were disenfranchised. Overall, of the 6.1 million people barred from voting because of felon disenfranchisement, 2.2 million of them are Black. Many felon disenfranchisement laws go beyond prohibiting people currently serving a sentence from voting. A full 77% of people who have been disenfranchised because of a felon live in a community outside of prison and are either on probation, parole, or have fully served out their sentence. Despite having already served their time, they are still being punished. What's more, it can often be confusing to know if you're allowed to vote if you're someone with a felon. The laws can be confusing, and some states like Iowa have flipped the laws on disenfranchisement when different governors take office. The consequences of this aren't just putting people's civic rights up on the chopping block every year. It can also have awful repercussions for people who try to cast a vote but don't know they're not allowed to. Some states criminalize this too, and you may end up facing criminal charges because you tried to vote. In the 2018 elections in Florida, the race for governor between Andrew Gillum and Ron DeSantis was heating up and getting a lot of media attention. But as we talked about earlier, there was another critical decision on the ballot that year: whether to return the voting rights of the 1.4 million Floridians whose right to vote had been taken away because of their past. And as I mentioned, an overwhelmingly majority of Floridians voters chose to restore voting rights to people with felonies. The ballot initiatives show that the belief in the right to vote cuts across party lines for voters, and that many Democrat and Republican voters were sick of the status quo. It was a life-changing moment for Floridians with felonies on their records, but one that was cut short, as I mentioned. Both the state and the House Senate versions of the bill would disenfranchise that Floridians just voted to restore. The bill is currently being challenged and decided in court. As many scholars have pointed out, the United States criminal justice system is merely the reincarnation of Jim Crow under a different name. Like Jim Crow, our criminal justice system subjugates Black and brown Americans to second-class citizenship and uses their oppression to maintain the status quo of white supremacy. For Republicans focused on maintaining the power of their largely white base, taking away the voting rights of millions, predominantly Black and brown people, is an effective, disgusting tactic. Another tactic that's been on the rise, especially recently, is runarounds to restrict voting access. These laws can look different in different states, but in general make it harder to have outside civic groups help register people to vote. The Tennessee legislature just passed a bill that will make it harder for organizations to help people register to vote by increasing the amount of training they require to do, creating new red tape for the groups to jump through, and creating a criminal and civil penalty for groups that submit too many deficient voter registrations. The Texas Senate also recently passed a bill that imposes many of these same restrictions. Their bill would also create new restrictions on people assisting voters with physical limitations or those who cannot read the ballot and permits poll watchers to inspect voter ID. Another common form of voter suppression we'll get to in a minute. And Texas and Tennessee are far from the only states trying to pass these sly attempts at voter suppression. In fact, according to an expert witness who testified before Congress earlier this year on the rise of voter suppression tactics in the states, there has been a clear increase in the number of restrictions to voter access since 2018 midterm elections. The elections, which of course was a blue wave and flipped the House from a Republican majority to a Democratic majority. Without that flip, it would have been nearly impossible for the House to begin impeachment inquiry or hold meaningful oversight hearings. In short, the 2018 midterm elections finally gave Democrats some sort of power, so Republican state legislatures across the country have turned to voter suppression after figuring out they couldn't win fair and square. Of course, another way to restrict access to voting is to simply limit the number of ways and times you can vote. And state Republican parties have been working on this too. Many states have severely restricted early voting hours, which is particularly important for people who cannot afford or not allowed to take time off on election day itself. For people balancing multiple jobs, childcare, and a lack of transportation, voting on election day itself can be difficult, especially given how long the lines can be. That's why early voting and vote by mail are so important. But it has been systematically rolled back and disproportionately harming voters of color in the process. Another really common form of voter suppression is in the form of voter ID laws. It's one that you all might be really familiar with as students, the students who are here. Because in a lot of states, your student ID might not be enough to vote with. Even if you attended a public university, which is ultimately run by the state, your state may say that form of identification isn't sufficient for voting. Over the last decades, Republicans in states across the US have been slowly but surely making it harder to vote by increasing the identification requirements at the polls. While the supporters of these laws claim it's to stop voter fraud, the truth is there has been zero, let me repeat that, zero instances of substantiated systematic voter fraud. Voter ID laws are a solution to a made-up problem. So why take the time to enact and enforce them? Because the people least likely to possess the required forms of identifications are predominantly people who will vote Democratic. Low-income people and people of color are disproportionately likely not to have the forms of identification needed to vote. Voting rights experts have pointed out the similarities between voter ID laws and poll taxes, as I mentioned. Acceptable forms of identification like driver's license cost money, not just the money to pay for the license itself, but also the cost of getting to the DMV. For Native American folks living on reservations, getting to the closest location to obtain a required ID can be more than just a hassle. It can be prohibitive. Your right to vote should never depend on how much money you have in the bank or whether or not you can get to the local registrar's office. But that's exactly what voter IDs are banking on. Nowhere was the intent and impact of voter ID laws more apparent than in Wisconsin in 2016 election. In 2016, Wisconsin instituted a new voter ID law that had strict identification requirements. Eddie Lee Hollowell Jr.'s story amplifies just how much this law contributed to voter suppression in the election. As reported by The Nation, Eddie, 58-year-old black man, had moved from Illinois to Wisconsin before the 2016 election. He prepared to vote. He brought his expired Illinois photo ID, birth certificate, and Social Security card to get the photo ID he needed to vote in Wisconsin. But the DMV he visited in Milwaukee rejected his application. On his birth certificate, due to a clerical error, his name was written as Eddie Jr. Holloway, not Eddie Holloway Jr. Now, Eddie didn't give up. He made 7 more trips to different agencies and offices to try and get his paperwork together, all so he could vote. He spent over $200 trying to get everything in order. But even after all of that, he still wasn't able to vote the identification he needed to be able to vote in Wisconsin. He wasn't able to get that. Eventually, Eddie was so dejected, he moved back to Illinois. Eddie's story is far from unique. A study found that the Wisconsin voter ID law suppressed more than 200,000 voters in 2016. You remember that blue wall? That's Wisconsin, one of the 3 states. 200,000. Meanwhile, Donald Trump won that state by a mere 22,748 votes. The final piece of voter suppression I'll go over, though we could keep going for days, is gerrymandering. Gerrymandering, according to the Brennan Center for Justice, is when district boundaries are intentionally manipulated to discriminate against a group of voters based on their political views or race. States have the ability to redraw their congressional and other districts every so often based on population sizes from the census. That's normal and makes sense. Each district should contain roughly the same amount of people, because if you do the math, why should a person in one district have more powerful vote than a person in another district? Simply because of where they live. But political parties can use this powerful responsibility to their advantage, and in doing so, unfairly disadvantage the people who live and vote in their state. North Carolina is a prime example. The state is fairly evenly divided politically and is usually a toss-up as whether it'll vote blue or red in a presidential election. But despite this, Republicans were able to successfully gerrymander the state's congressional map to hold 10 of the state's 13 congressional delegates. That means that they've so rigged the map that they've affectionately stolen control of the state. How does that work? They draw the district to give each district a slight but certain Republican stronghold. This means drawing maps that intentionally split up Democratic pockets, including many predominantly black and brown neighborhoods, to reduce their voting power. So in a state where Democrats should have, say, 45% of the power in the state, they only hold 23% of the state's congressional seats. If that's not disenfranchisement, I don't know what is. The picture I've painted is bleak, I know. These aren't simple challenges from 2016 and 2018. They're the questions we must solve if we want to be the democracy we set out to be. Regardless of who wins the presidential election in 2020, voter suppression won't be solved. If a Democrat wins the election, it will be in spite of voter suppression, not because it's over. If a Republican wins, voter suppression will have played a no small role. The problem is clear. Many people in this country are still being denied the right to vote, the right to have a say in the direction of their country and community, in order to maintain the dominance of the wealthy status quo. But it's important not to lose hope. We think about this a lot from an organizing perspective. People don't take action when they're feeling helpless and lost. Helplessness inspires only inaction, not action. In 1963, John Lewis was 23 years old. He was one of the Big Six, a group of civil rights leaders who were planning the March on Washington. When he got there, he talked about patience and why we can never be patient when it comes to our rights or the rights of our fellow Americans. Here's what he said. For those who have said, be patient and wait, we have long said that we cannot be patient. We do not want our freedom gradually, but we want to be free now. We are tired. We are tired of being beaten by policemen. We are tired of seeing our people locked up in jail over and over again. And then you holler, be patient. How long can we be patient? We want our freedom, and we won't want it now. We do not want to go to jail, but we will go to jail if this is the price we must pay for love, brotherhood, and true peace. I appeal to all of you to get into this great revolution that is sweeping this nation. Get in and stay in the streets of every city, every village, and hamlet of this nation until true freedom comes, until the revolution of 1776 is complete. We must get in this revolution and complete the revolution. For in the Delta in Mississippi, in the Southwest Georgia, in the Black Belt of Alabama, in Harlem, in Chicago, Detroit, Philadelphia, and all over this nation, the black masses are on the march for jobs and freedom. They're talking about slow down and stop, but we will not stop. All of the forces of Eastland, Barnett, Wallace, and Thurman will not stop this revolution. If we do not get meaningful legislation out of this Congress, the time will come when we will not confine our marching to Washington. We will march through the South, through the streets of Jackson, through the streets of Danville, through the streets of Cambridge, through the streets of Birmingham. But we will march with the spirit of love and with the spirit of dignity that we have shown here today. By the force of our demands, our determination, our numbers, we shall splinter the segregated South into 1,000 pieces and put them together in the image of God and democracy. We must say, wake up, America, wake up. For we cannot stop, and we will not and cannot be patient. Patience is not always a virtue when it comes to the right to vote. One of the most fundamental ways we can show who this country values, we cannot be patient. We cannot wait for someone else to take action. Our democracy is at stake right now. So I'm calling on you, never be patient when someone else's rights are in the balance. Never wait to be told how you can help. Make impatience a virtue. Thank you.
Wow. Atia? Is she in the house? There we go. Well, a statement that I'd like Atia to read. Would you, please?
All right. We are almost at that time. So we know that you have been inspired by today's program and by the entire trilogy of the 400 years. We also hope that you have been influenced to carry forward the spirit of freedom and impatience into your daily lives, into your choices and decisions, into your voting, and maybe even into hosting your own 400-year observance. So we ask that you turn to the last page of your program to look for the statement of observance and read along with me. This statement was developed by 400 Years of Inequality. It's a nationwide coalition of organizations and individuals dedicated to dismantling structural inequality. Their goal is that 1 million Americans will participate in 400-year observances, so please officially consider yourself part of that movement of people. And so the statement goes, today we gather in a place where inequality still prevails. We gather here in 2019 to remember the story of this place and to think of other times and other places. We remember that 400 years ago, Africans landed at Jamestown and were sold into bondage. We remember that those Africans were forced to work land stolen from the native people. We remember that white workers, men and women, were forced into indentured servitude. We see that from the roots was built an ecology of inequality, and we know we don't want to live in the house of white supremacy. Therefore, on this day, we lift up this place. We acknowledge this land and the sovereignty of the people who lived here. We lift up all the ancestors who have struggled for justice, and in their memory, we proclaim that we are the history of a just future. Thank you.
The violinists, come forward, please. You want to say anything before? Okay. This is Beldaris. Now, just before you go, that was tremendous, wasn't it? Just before you go, I'd like to give special recognition to the people who were responsible for bringing this program, these 3 episodes to you. You see on your program the committee and your sponsors. I would like very much for you to give them a round of applause. And I know the person who stood behind me in a great deal of what I have labored through, and that is a person who, when I come to her and ask her to support me in virtually anything, her answer is always, "What is it? Let's do it." And so that's my dean. That's Mary Kay McKay. And I know that you are as anxious to get on with buying this book that's right in front of me here. And we'll get a signature. Will they get, oh, buddy, you get a chance to see it signed by the author. And that will take place back on the left, my left, and the T-shirts will be on sale on the right. Is that right? In the general same area. So if you are interested, and maybe Karine, you might want to go back where the books are so you can be. I'm sorry. Oh, she's going to be. Oh, in the back? Where? Oh, over on the side? Okay, book signing over here. Okay, there you are, Karine. There you got some direction. Okay. And so there's only, was a comment back there? Just one, we've lost some audience because obviously people had to go. How many of you have seen and participated in one of the episodes? How many have participated in two? How many have participated in all of them? Okay, that's good. Now remember the statements of the chair. I think you'll find those statements hair curling even if you have no hair. So I want you to read them, and I certainly want you to share them with your friends. And so what I can say after these 3 episodes is there's only one other thing to say, and that is if I want to go home tonight and not have to sleep in a hotel, somebody better help me thank my wife. So with that, you're dismissed.